I said in my last video that the most difficult part of learning to play the violin, and therefore the thing that you should be focusing on the most, is the bow arm. But that doesn't really tell you that much about where you should start, so that is going to be the subject of today's video. I'm Tobias Murphy, and this is Murphy Music Academy. Now, of course, first things first, any and all of the exercises that I put in my videos are going to be best done with a dedicated teacher that will guide you through the process, especially when it comes to these foundational exercises. So if you are interested in having myself or one of my assistants work with you through your journey in learning to play the violin, then please shoot an email to admin@murphymusicacademy.org. And as always, like, comment, and subscribe. And oh, by the way, I know there's been a lot of comments that I haven't been very good about responding to. Some of you left some very, very insightful comments on some of my last videos. As you might have noticed, it's been a while since I posted anything. I've been extraordinarily busy for the past month, and especially the past couple of weeks for, unfortunately, non-violin-related things. Non-violin-related things. So hopefully I will be better about responding to some of your comments in the future. Now, on to the content of this video. In my last video, I did state that I found the ability to play a clean, smooth stroke from frog to tip and tip to frog on an open string using only the weight of the bow to be the foundation of violin playing. You see, just about every single bow stroke that you will do, if you do it properly, is going to actually have the exact same motor pattern from your wrist to your shoulder. The difference between any two bow strokes actually is almost entirely dependent on what happens from your wrist to your fingers, and also a little bit of this rotational motion here. But essentially everything that moves the bow from one end of the bow to the other is going to remain 99% the same no matter what bow stroke you are doing. For example, take a basic détaché stroke and a spiccato stroke. Almost nothing changed in what I was doing here, except, of course, the spiccato stroke uses a much smaller amount of bow. So the actual motion that I'm using is smaller, but the motion is the same. The difference is happening right here in my fingers. And that's what makes the difference between the bow stroke. And the significance of this is that means that I need to train, if I want to have a consistent and beautiful bow arm, I have to train my arm, basically in this motion from frog to tip, to essentially do the exact same thing all the time, so then all of the nuances of the different bow strokes I can practice in my fingers and in my wrist and in this rotational motion here, and I can trust that this motion is always going to be secure and the same, which was going to give me a lot more consistency and a lot more control over my bow stroke. The same thing goes for adding pressure to the bow. A lot of people, when they want to add pressure to the bow, they end up putting their entire arm down into the string like that. Not only is that much more difficult to control, but also usually just creates a much worse sound. So instead, this same bow stroke, the same motion remains the same, and I actually push the bow into the string with my fingers, and so this, I can just keep going along this train track here on my bow arm, and then if I want more pressure into the bow, then I just use my fingers, and this moves the same way. If I want less, then I use my fingers to take the weight out of the bow, and the bow arm still moves in the exact same manner. And this is why when you learn to do this basic bow stroke, we only use, as much as is possible, the weight of the bow itself. We need to start with something absolutely neutral, and that also forces us, and this is very important to bow technique, work with the bow and not try to force the bow to do anything that we want it to do. So, how do we get started? Well, the best way to start here is to start actually not from the frog, but in the middle of the bow. We're going to slowly work our way down. Now, in order to get the arm to move the bow where there are no bumps or skips or anything within the bow stroke, we need the arm to be what I call completely quiet, especially, and I've talked about this before, the good old trapezius muscle right here, okay? This has to be completely out of the picture. And so what you want to do, okay, just take the bow, hold it about in front of your violin like that, just kind of let it drop so everything feels very settled and relaxed, okay? And then what you want to do, first off, you want to make sure that you're not raising your shoulder. You want to take a lot of time to set up for these things. More time you take to set up is actually less time you probably have to take practicing it, which, again, saves time. So make sure everything is nice and relaxed in your trapezius muscle. Some people have a really, really hard time here. They just are very naturally tight. And for those of you that struggle with that, I would actually suggest being a little bit more aggressive, where you actually kind of stretch this way. I've seen people go from completely bouncing bows to 100% smooth bows while having their neck stretched this way, because it's forcing the trapezius muscle out of the process. And some of you might have to do that. Hopefully you won't, but if you do, it's worth a try. Whatever it takes, get this out of the picture. So you're going to put the bow on the string, okay? And what you want to do is make sure you're just using the weight of the bow. So what I suggest is that you lift up all of the fingers except for the middle finger and the thumb. Okay, now we're not going to actually play this way, but you need to know what it feels like to have the bow just resting there and be very comfortable, okay? And another thing, some people have trouble just sitting the bow on the string without moving, okay? If that's a problem that you have, then that's actually something you want to take care of first. You should be able to just let the bow sit on the string and not have to add any pressure or anything and not have the bow skirting around like that, okay? If you have that problem, then just learn to be kind of comfortable and zen and just sit here and let the bow sit on the string, okay? Now, once you've let the bow sit on the string for a little bit, put the fingers back on, okay? And then make sure your elbow's not too low. What I like to do is make sure is start with a place where there's more or less a straight line from one end of my knuckle to my elbow, okay? Breathe out. And then just open the arm. And you also want to do this in front of a mirror because you do want to make sure that your bow is fairly straight. So, okay, we start with the bow fairly straight, and then just open the arm. And that's it, okay? That was just the weight of the bow, all right? Show you from this angle. Okay, start right here. And even if you have trouble, whenever you put your fingers back on to press the bow on the string, you can actually just play like this for a certain amount of the bow. All right? That is pure sound, all right? Then, once you get comfortable with that, and most people are not going to have a problem with that. Some people actually do, and if that's you, then you need to take your time, get all these muscles sorted out, and don't move on until you're able to do that from the middle of the bow. Then what you do is you go a couple inches lower, okay? So, I'm a couple inches lower, same thing. Release, relax, and then open the arm. That's what you really want to think of. Just open the arm. Okay? Be very relaxed. All right. Now, same thing. And you're going to keep doing this. A couple inches lower. And then once you pass the balance point of the bow, that's where things, of course, start to get a little bit tricky. And that's where committing to being completely relaxed and just letting the bow be on the string is the most important, okay? So here's the thing. Even if it scratches, let it. It's actually very easy to fix scratching, especially at the frog. What's not easy to fix is somebody that's very uptight about playing at the frog and gets tense. That's a lot more difficult to fix. I've had people where I've told them, actually, scratch, okay? When you're learning to play at the frog, embrace scratching. You can fix that once you embrace it in a couple weeks. All right, so if you get to the frog, shorter ceilings in this place. If you get to the frog and that happens, let it happen. Don't tense up. Whatever you do, don't tense up your shoulder and pick up the bow like that. Let it sit on the string, okay? So just do the same thing and just open the arm. Okay? And once you get to, and some of you won't actually scratch at the frog, you'll just handle it normally, but once you get to the frog and you're having some trouble with scratching, okay? Remember what I said in my video on the bow hold, all right? So I talked about the ability to do this, okay? Now this is very important because this is actually how you're going to take care of some of that scratchiness at the frog, all right? So, because what we want is we want the arm to always move this way. Just two-dimensionally. We never want the arm to pick up the bow this way, all right? So what we want to do is have the arm be the same place here as here, okay? in the two-dimensional sense. And then when I get to here, I'm actually going to pick up the bow a little bit with my fingers. Okay, so my arm still feels like it's sitting in the same place. My fingers take care, and it's just a very tiny motion, take care of some of the weight of the frog. Okay. And that is how you handle the weight of the frog. Now, once you are comfortable doing a completely smooth down bow, and many of you this will take some time because there will be some little tremors just left over. Very often you'll feel, it won't actually be here. Very often if you have sort of the skittering across the bow when you're doing this, you'll actually find there's just little tiny bits of tension that are trying to creep up in your arm. It may be here, but very often it's here. That is what I call a lack of use problem. Once you get the basic motor pattern here, where it's the exact same motion, and this is nice and relaxed, and you're just letting the weight of the bow sit on the string throughout the entire bow stroke, then very often this is fixed. The problems in here are fixed just by doing it a lot. Okay, once the arm gets comfortable with it, it'll stop kind of doing the shaking, and you'll do just fine. Now, the next thing is we have the down bow. Okay, so that's nice. But we have to do the up bow and get back to the frog. And the trick here is making sure that we get back exactly to where we started, because I've seen many people, they can start at the frog, go to the tip, but once they do the up bow and get back to the frog, they end up, as they get close to the balance point, they end up trying to move the arm in a different way. They end up trying to pick up the arm with the trapezius muscle here, pick up the bow with the trapezius muscle. And so you're going to have to work against that. You want your motion up and down to be mirror images of each other. So, start at the tip, of course, just use the weight of the bow like that. And then, okay? And as you get close to the frog, you're going to want to, again, feel yourself, if this is something you struggle with the scratching, feel yourself kind of pick up the bow a tiny, tiny bit with your fingers, okay? And resist any and all temptation to lift the trapezius muscle or any other part of the arm this way, in any way, lifting the bow with the arm, because that will actually cause more problems. Because if you lift the bow at all with your arm, what will inevitably happen when you do the subsequent down bow again is the arm will actually come back down, and then you'll actually throw the bow at the string, even if it's just the tiniest bit, throw the bow at the string, and you will get unwanted bouncing in your longbow stroke. So, to review, start with our fingers up a little bit, keep our shoulder down, bring the bow to the frog, and remember, the frog is here, not here, and then relax, then just open the arm, okay, and then back up. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the foundation of all bowing. This is so important to be able to do that very simple bow stroke that I make sure my students practice this for a long time after they've learned it, even after they start doing some more complicated bowing exercises. It is that important to have this motion ingrained where you can do it in your sleep for violin playing. Now, as you start to get a little bit more comfortable with this bow stroke, there are 3 points that you need to focus on. The first point is, well, you want to make sure that the point of the bow does not move like this during the bow stroke. And you also need to make sure that the point of the bow does not move like this during the bow stroke. And then you also really need to make sure that the point of the bow does not move like this during the bow stroke, and that wherever you place the bow between the fingerboard and the bridge, at the beginning of the bow stroke, it stays there throughout the entirety of the stroke. Having that level of what I'd call point consistency is going to really, really refine the motion in your bow arm. Now, again, once you get a little bit more comfortable with this, then it is actually time to start messing around with some other things to add to the basic open string. And there are 3 aspects of sound production as far as the bow is concerned, and they are pressure, bow speed, and, as I just mentioned before, sounding point. Once a student is able to pull a nice, clean, open string stroke with complete point consistency, then it's time to start messing around with these other aspects of bow control and bow sound production on still an open string. So I want to start here with pressure, and I call these exercises, by the way, targeted bow division, and you'll see why in a minute. So for pressure in targeted bow division, what we're going to do is we're going to start, as we did with a regular long bow, very light here at the frog, and then we're going to slowly, and this is very important, gradually add pressure towards the middle. And the high point of the pressure, the most pressure that you can possibly give, is going to be right here in the middle. And then once you hit the middle, again, you gradually loose pressure until you get to another very light touch here at the tip. And this will look like this, okay? And remember, pressure comes from the fingers. So the actual bow stroke that we practice remains exactly the same. Now, one of the things you'll notice when you start to practice this is that very likely when you first start, you will be adding pressure either too little, and so you don't actually, it doesn't really sound like you're doing anything at all, or you will do too much too soon, and you'll hear that kind of crack in the sound. That comes from actually adding pressure too much too soon. If you add pressure very gradually, you can actually get a lot of pressure into the string and have a nice, clear, focused sound. However, if you do too much, if there's not a very even distribution of the pressure, you will have that kind of choking sound. So there's a lot of control, not just, of course, maintaining this movement, but also in adding pressure. And then the other side of this, of course, this side of the bow is much heavier than this side of the bow, but I want them to sound basically the same. So in this exercise, I'm going to have to learn how to add pressure here differently than how I had pressure here. Now, as far as the bow division part of this goes, well, I'm going to now divide the bow into two, and I'm going to do the same pressure scheme on this side of the bow and this side of the bow. So I'm going to be light here, and then heavy here, and then light here again. And then starting at the middle of the bow, same thing. Light here, heavy here, and light here. And also, by the way, whenever you start dividing the bow, you have to do less pressure as you go along. Anyway, you can keep dividing the bow up into three, do the same thing in each three parts, and then four, and then I go to about 8, and I don't think there's really that much point in doing past 8, but you can if you want to. And the thing about this is, besides just, of course, teaching the arm to maintain this motion and teaching the fingers how to apply pressure in all sorts of different parts of the bow, it's really great because it also teaches you exactly which part of the bow you're in. A lot of people, when they're playing, they actually have no idea exactly where the middle of the bow is from just feeling, and especially not from seeing from this vantage point. It's a great way to teach you how to, of course, map out the bow and teach you how to use each part of the bow in whatever way you want. Next, we come to speed, and this is the real test of whether or not you've made this motion 100% consistent. Because here's how we're going to do this, right? Similar to pressure, we're going to have a lot of speed in one part of the bow and very little speed in another part of the bow. So we're going to start here at the frog. Okay, and then I'm going to do 3/4 of the bow as fast as I can, and then 1/4 of the bow very slowly, all of a sudden. So here we go. I need to put rosin on. And then go back in the up bow. Now, those of you who have ever tried to do a fast whole bow probably understand the difficulties of doing this exercise. First thing, like I said earlier about point consistency, if you do any type of motion of the arm this way, whereas you see the point moves like this, which is very tempting to do at the beginning of the stroke, everyone wants to pull down, literally down this way instead of keeping the bow completely horizontal, and the motion of the arm completely two-dimensional, you are going to have a very difficult time getting a smooth stroke for the 3/4 of the bow that you're playing very fast. And then the other side is, how do you teach yourself to stop the bow almost and go very, very slowly in one smooth motion? The best way I have found to conceptualize this is that I don't imagine that the bow is really slowing down. I try to imagine, it may sound a little quirky, but it works. I imagine that time is slowing down. So instead of me just having to control the bow and get very slow, I imagine that, oh, suddenly I'm just like in a movie going slow motion. And I don't know why, but that seems to work very, very well in terms of having that sense of control, because this way you don't feel like you suddenly put on the brakes. You feel like the same momentum that you started with keeps going, except just time is dilated around it. And this is very important when you get up to very slow here, because again, when we talked about having the long bow, when we get past the balance point, wanting to raise the shoulder, well, that is going to be an even bigger problem when you have to do it very suddenly, okay? So when you get to here, you want to make sure that you still feel the same momentum of the bow, and you almost want to feel like the bow is just moving itself and you are along for the ride. And of course, the same thing you can do here. You can divide the bow up, so I'm going to do these 3/4 of this half of the bow fast, and this slow, and then this up here fast, and this slow, and going back down again. And you can keep doing this, dividing up into 3, into 4. I only go to 4 when I work with students, but again, you can do as many as you want, so long as you have complete control. The last one is, of course, sounding point, and this is the most simple. Basically, we are going to start at the frog here, at the fingerboard, and we're going to slowly move the bow, and the goal is we want to keep the bow basically as straight as possible. We don't want to drag the bow this way, okay? We are going to move the bow across the various sounding points to the tip, okay? And this one is also a good one to test how much control you have in playing light bow at the frog, using, of course, the fingers again, because if you don't play very, very lightly right here at the fingerboard sounding point, then it's going to sound like this. Also remember to pull very, very slowly, because when you're trying to get from here to here in one bow, it's very easy to get all the way over to here and still be in the middle of the bow. So. Yeah, and the bridge is going to sound like that. The next one, of course, is a little bit easier, actually. You actually do go from the fingerboard to the bridge and then back to the fingerboard in one bow. And then the next one, which is what I call inching, and probably the most applicable to actual playing, is where you start here and you just kind of go back and forth like this and inch your way closer to the bridge until you get to the tip. Anyway, these are the open string exercises that I give to every single one of my students, because they are the foundation of a good bow arm, and therefore, in my opinion, the foundation of violin playing. And if you master them, you will be in a great spot to develop beautiful tone and very solid violin playing all around. They're not very glamorous, they might be a bit mundane, but we're going to practice them anyway. And do you know why? Because I personally can't think of anything more unglamorous than taking pleasure in mediocrity. I've been Tobias Murphy for Murphy Music Academy. Happy practicing, and I'll see you next time.